There are a host of issues, as I laid out, but I would start with one of my favorites, and that is the always cute and cuddly North Koreans and how we can better deal with that problem. Anyone who thinks the United States can deal with that problem alone, I think is wrong. The U.S. is not going to be able to deal with that problem. And I think the process that President Trump has had on North Korea has kind of proven that. He went to talk to them in Singapore. Actually, I didn't think that was such a terrible idea. But as with a lot of things, well, I don't care whether it's cooking or whatever, you should do some preparation before you get to the stove. And I think there was very little preparation for Singapore. There seemed to be even less preparation for the meeting in Hanoi. And finally, we have basically nothing to show for it with North Korea except 3 years of lost time. In the meantime, we have not worked closely with the Chinese. We have not worked closely enough with our two allies, Japan and South Korea. And one has the impression that if there were a second Trump administration, we would sort of go along in this direction with nothing being done. Most worrisomely, I think, is that the president indicated in Singapore that he would like to bring U.S. troops back from South Korea. And you have to ask yourself the question, if we bring troops back from South Korea, what will happen in the South Korean-Chinese relationship? Would we see an even emboldened China? Would we see a South Korea that's got to kind of work more with China? What would be the relationship in Japan? Now, Japan has just changed prime ministers in the last 24 hours. They had a prime minister, whether you like Shinzo Abe or not, he was a veteran ball player there. He knew how to play the game, but now he's gone. So how would that work if the U.S. decided to pull troops out of South Korea in the expectation or hopes of getting something from the North Koreans? Would the Japanese be okay being the only country in Asia with U.S. troops? After all, those U.S. troops went there in 1945 for, how should I put it, a different purpose. And would the Japanese be satisfied with that? So I think there's a lot at stake here in these relationships. I think the U.S. does need to kind of find some more patterns of cooperation, not only with China, which is a very big challenge, but also with some of our partners and neighbors. Clearly, we need to hold some of those partners and neighbors, or partners and allies, I should say, closely with respect to China's effort to unilaterally take the South China Sea and turn it into a southern Chinese lake. We cannot accept that, but at the same time, our non-acceptance of that, I think, would be a lot more effective if we could work with other countries, the maritime countries in Southeast Asia, and work with them on how China can understand that, can be brought to understand that they may have a policy position that we don't like, but they don't have to act on the policy. And I think that is the big problem. Many countries have policy positions. Countries have territorial disputes. You would be amazed at the territorial disputes that go on in places like Europe, but there's never any acting on it. And I think the issue is to try to get ourselves in a position where China realizes it's not in its interest to act on these issues. We need to work with these other countries so that we are not always taking point. And in the case of some of the Chinese issues on the economic issue, where we've been very concerned about what we consider theft of intellectual property rights, the Chinese would disagree, but whatever it is, it's been an extortion of, or an attempt to take technology when our companies didn't want to give it up and felt they had to in order to have some economic benefit that they really needed. Well, we need to understand, and many of our European allies have the same problems with China. So why are we creating problems with European allies when we should be working with them on China? We should have a much more of an effort to say, look to the Chinese, it's not just us, we have European allies as well. And I think the U.S. needs to kind of overall leverage our position.